Hello there, you're watching the Press Preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour, we're going to be talking through the headlines with the journalist and author Rachel Shabby and the Guido Fawkes reporter Tom Harwood. So very good evening to you two.
Hello.
So let's take a look at what's making those Sunday paper front pages. And the Mail on Sunday is suggesting that plans are being drawn up to airlift British citizens out of Wuhan in China, which has been the epicentre of the coronavirus outbreak. The Observer reports that ministers have been told that it would cost at least £12 billion to scrap the HS2 high-speed rail link. That story is also the lead in the Sunday Telegraph, which reports on allegations of multiple cover-ups relating to the soaring costs of the scheme. The Sunday Express says Boris Johnson hopes the UK will become a global trailblazer after leaving the EU. The Sunday Times reports the Prime Minister is on course for a diplomatic war with Donald Trump over plans to hand Huawei's access to Britain's 5G network. The Sunday Mirror carries the story of a man who says he was drugged by serial rapist Reynard Sinaga and that a violent struggle ensued between them. The Daily Star reports on a star of EastEnders being suspended from the show. And The Sun says model Lauren Goodman has revealed that she's expecting a baby and claims that an unnamed England footballer is the father. So Rachel Shabby and Tom Harwood here with me tonight. And we're going to kick off with the story that has led many newspapers and bulletins as well, and that is the coronavirus. The Observer's front page story is about HS2, which we're going to come to in a moment, but you wanted to focus on the picture story in the second headline. China puts 50 million in quarantine, and it is an extraordinary step, isn't it, from a country trying to come to terms and deal with this epidemic.
It's so easy to look at a number of like 50 million and not really contextualise it. I mean, you almost think of that Stalin quote that, you know, 1 million deaths is a statistic, but one is a tragedy. But that's 50 million people who have had their liberty removed from them. That's almost the population of England there in one fell swoop, really affected by this. And it shows the scale that I'm not sure everyone was fully across until the last few days. This is a really, really serious issue.
Well, it is, and there's still a lot of questions to be answered about it, aren't there, which scientists are trying to get to the bottom of, trying to establish where it's come from, to what extent it is transferring human to human, which it clearly is, but how much of a problem, the potential death rate, and of course scrabbling to try and come up with a vaccine to try and solve it. But in the meantime, very interesting steps being taken by China to try to contain it.
Yeah, it must be such an extraordinary operation, just because, as Tom says, the incredible scale of it, 50 million people having to be put in quarantine, just logistically, operationally, how you would do that is immense. It's an immense operation. And so, you know, China is trying, as we say, to do all it can to, you know, impose this lockdown, even while some people, you know, people do want to celebrate the Lunar New Year within the confines of that lockdown. But we are hearing all kinds of reports of, you know, hospitals absolutely at capacity. There are plans to build 1,000-bed hospital in 10 days to meet some of the capacity
as well now,
right,
going up within a week or something.
There's a big PR effort on the behalf of the Chinese government, where they sort of sent out these videos of dozens and dozens of diggers constructing these hospitals, and it looked like this was a country that could be on top of it. But actually, the scale now reaching 50 million, 1 or 2 hospitals is not going to come anywhere close to being able to deal with it.
Well, that's right. They're now talking about a second emergency hospital that they hope will handle 1,300 cases. And actually, there was a similar situation with the SARS outbreak back in 2003, and apparently they built a hospital in 7 days, largely out of prefabricated buildings, which is why they were able to put it up at some speed. These are the pictures I think you're referring to, Tom, of all those diggers there ready to get to work. I mean, extraordinary scenes, and ones you can't imagine in another country in some ways. The fact that the way that China is run means that putting in some of these cancelling bus services, effectively shutting towns. It's hard to imagine happening elsewhere.
Well, I suppose, you know, when you're in a country that large, then you have capacity to do things at that scale, right? I mean, you would just have capacity to scale up. But even then, just the level of coordination and operation that you would need for this. And also, of course, just to manage the level of anxiety that people would have and try to prevent any kind of panic causing any sort of surge in any context, so keeping a handle of that. And we're hearing people, Chinese people who are being interviewed are saying that they absolutely do have trust in official announcements about the virus and what's happening operationally. And you would need that. You absolutely would need that sort of public buy-in to what the government is saying in order to execute this kind of operation, right?
And President Xi has been talking today, actually. He talked about the virus accelerating and he talked about it being a grave situation.
Yeah.
But let's turn to the Mail on Sunday, shall we? Because they turn attention to Britain. They say airlift to save Britain's trapped by virus. And they're talking about a possible evacuation plan of some who are near the epicentre, if you like, of this virus.
And this is a bit of a U-turn. For the last few days, they were saying that they were not going to bring people out of the area. But after, I think it was France and the US said that they were going to extract their citizens, now the UK is belatedly rowing in and looking at ways to get people out of there and obviously move them back to a quarantine situation in this country. But more than that, there are 2,000 people in this country who the government's trying to track down, locate and test for this virus. There have
people
been
who've travelled recently.
People who have
from
recently returned from the area, a lot of them students. There have been no confirmed cases yet in this country of coronavirus, but there have just been 3 in France. And what this piece says is they expect that within days there will be 1 confirmed in this country.
That's right. This is a double-page spread inside the Mail on Sunday, isn't it? This is pages 10 and 11. I don't know if we can look at those now. There we go. And at the same time, we should remember that Public Health England talked yesterday about the risk being low. They also talked about lots of measures in place to be ready for this. And it's easy for people to worry about it, understandably, but at the same time, we do still have those questions about just how infectious it is or just how dangerous it is at the moment.
That's right. But the grey area seems to be the incubation period, doesn't it? So if it takes a week before you show symptoms of it, then there's that sort of perilous area of a week in which, you might be carrying it unwittingly. So that's the bit that, they need to get a handle on. But there is a race now to find a virus. And, the international community of scientists are all, working full speed to develop a virus and are expected to be doing so imminently. Public Health England itself made a breakthrough, developed a genetic test capable of diagnosing within a day. Obviously, that is a crucial breakthrough, given that if you are a carrier, then you need to be quarantined immediately. So the sooner that is detected, obviously, the better for everybody. So that is quite a significant breakthrough.
Yeah, certainly. And British scientists are being really bigged up by this piece in the Mail, where more are going to be flying out to the area to work with the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations and help deliver that cure, that vaccine. But yeah, ultimately, this is something that is, I think, has been underestimated in terms of the scale. And perhaps we are right to be a little bit more cautious about the whole affair.
Yeah, and hopefully some lessons have been learned from SARS and MERS, which is a form of coronavirus, I believe.
Yeah.
Let's move on to another story, though, which is getting a couple of headlines in the papers, and this is concerning HS2. The Observer there saying the £12 billion bill for scrapping the high-speed rail link, and we're expecting a decision imminently, aren't we, on whether all of it or some of it will go ahead.
I find this story a little bit funny in The Observer because ultimately, they're saying this £12 billion bill is being made up of the £9 billion that has already been spent and potentially £3 about winding it down. That's nothing in comparison to the cost of it going forward, which is well over £100 billion. So it's sort of odd that they're trying to spin this as a cost-saving measure to then spend a further £90 billion building the thing. But it does show that this is a real debate within government. You'd think that a Conservative stonking majority would not have these sort of disagreements. And yet this is something that there are very passionate views on both sides amongst Conservative MPs. There are lots of Conservative MPs with constituencies that are being deeply affected by HS2. Naturally, you'd expect them to be more against the project. But there's also an ideological underpinning to this argument, whereby the sort of more free market right side of the party is very, very sceptical of this project, and they see it as a sort of white elephant, spending for spending's sake. And the cost is something that we're going to be hearing repeatedly. It's interesting that the pro-HS2 side are trying to win that argument and present arguments in terms of cost that has been something that the anti-HS2 side has seen as a card that they should play. And
we only have a very little time before we ought to go to a break, but I'm going to show the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. I'm not sure if we've got time to do it justice here, but they have more suggestions of inflated costs and allegations against HS2 Limited, the company behind it, which they're denying. But it feeds into this controversy over the cost and perhaps, would you say, a divided country as well as perhaps divided politicians over it?
I think we will have to go into this in more detail maybe after the break, but these are allegations coming from the former Director of Strategy and others at HS2, which is accused of inflating the cost, but also covering that up, which, as you say, the government has denied those allegations. But it's an interesting division, isn't it? But I think it speaks to the division inside the Conservative Party itself, because it is now comprised of, both in terms of voters and government, it's comprised of this weird, uneasy alliance of people who do believe in state intervention and people who are fiscally free marketeers. So I'm not really sure how that's going to play out going forward.
I'm going to have to cut you off, only because we really do need to go to a break, but we'll have plenty of time to revisit these issues next hour, if not after the break. But we are going to go to that break. Coming up, our guests will ponder various subjects, including why the Sunday Express thinks it's still front-page news that Boris Johnson believes that Brexit is going to be great. We'll have more on that in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. With me tonight, Rachel Shabby and Tom Harwood. And we're going to turn to the front page of the Sunday Express. And they are leading with Boris and Brexit, they say.
They are, and surprise, surprise, Boris thinks that Brexit will be brilliant, and so does the Sunday Express. I don't think that these are, this is massive news, but what it does tie into is sort of that future plan of this government. This is a piece that mentions the potential US trade agreement that the American Treasury Secretary has been saying should be done concurrently in the next 11 months with the EU deal. The Americans are quite keen to have a deal done before their election in November, and that sort of deadline could be quite conducive to getting a good deal on the UK side. But more than that, this is Boris saying that he wants Britain, in the week that we're leading up to finally leaving the European Union, he wants Britain to become a global trailblazer, setting its own standards and being able to innovate in a way that the rest of the world will follow.
What do you make of it, Rachel?
I mean, these are lovely words from Boris Johnson, but, you know, it all remains to be seen, doesn't it? The thing about the deadlines for trade negotiations is that it is not enough time, clearly. There's very little that can be done by this sort of self-imposed cut-off period of the end of 2020. Talk about tying your own hands in a negotiation. Why you would impose that deadline on yourself, I really don't know. But what's clear is that the scale of things that need to be done, it's very unlikely that we'll have anything other than a very sort of bare bones, skeletal agreements with the EU, never mind any other countries, perhaps very short-term ones that need to renew year on year, perhaps, you know, with fisheries, for instance, maybe something like Norway, which renegotiates on a yearly basis. But it's going to be very basic, whatever it is.
Very briefly, do you accept that? I mean, the time pressure is going to be the problem. Even there's the political will, but it's going to be in everyone's interest.
Deadlines do make deals. If this was a more open-ended thing, there wouldn't be that pressure, and the pressure does yield results. And ultimately, we're already starting to see the results. Just yesterday, the government said it was opting out of the EU's copyright directive. That's one of the examples of things of this country doing things differently and better better in a way that's going to innovate and make things better for the future.
OK, we're going to move on. Next Friday is the deadline for Britain leaving the EU. It's also the end of veganuary for a lot of people. This is my rather tortuous link into the next story.
It worked.
I've now left you only with about 20 seconds to talk about it, but it's suggesting that some of these products are perhaps not as healthy as...
No, well,
Imagine, is that what they're saying?
some of them you risk consuming more salt and sugar than if you ate the real thing, according to this Sun expose on plant foods. And in particular, it's zoned in on egg yolks, which I don't know how they're made when they're vegan, but they are 40 times saltier than actual egg yolks.
OK.
It is a great irony. The kind of people that tell us all to be vegans are somewhat sort of more health aware, more smug, some might say, and having a story like this does turn the tables somewhat in a satisfying way.
OK, brace yourself. Your Twitter's going to be full of comments.
You've brought that on yourself, Tom.
Anyway, we are out of time, but I'll see you both then at 11:30. Thank you.